Okay, so I'm going to walk through some research and here to provide lots of data, facts, and metrics that hopefully you'll find helpful. But I'm going to start with a question to this group. And the question is, how many of you know who Darnella Fraser is? Darnella Fraser. So Darnella Fraser, 16 years old at the time, is a young lady outside Cup Foods in Minneapolis who took the video of what happened to George Floyd. And I say that to say we should know who she is. I say that to say she started the domino effect that led to the funding for this research. I say that to say the camera is very powerful. Right, Marcus? Very powerful. And I sat on a panel with Heather McGhee a couple years ago, an author. She wrote The Sum of Us. And she said, every single thing we believe is based on a story we've been told. Everything. Everything. Storytelling matters. That's why we did this research. So we're going to walk through the research. I'm Sheldon Lyn. I'm a partner at McKinsey Company. By day, I support consumer companies on strategy. And by night, I lead our work on inclusive growth in film and TV. And I co-led, mic support, I co-led the research 3 years ago on black representation in film and TV. Now this is, thank you. This is a body of work that has a very long shelf life because the issues we found were literally hundreds of years in the making. They won't be fixed in 2 or 3 years. And the report's available online. I think I met Robin earlier who said she's found it. I encourage you to go and look at that. But I'm going to talk to you a bit about why we did the research, how we did the research, what the major findings were, which in many ways will be providing data for your lived experiences if you work in film and TV. Then I'm going to talk a bit via a type of a fireside chat with Aaron Edmonds. I'll introduce him more completely before that segment, ask a few questions of him, and then turn it over to you guys to ask questions. How does that sound? Yeah. All right, let's go. Next, please. All right, so the research was done. Can we advance the slide, please? The research was done summer 2021. And it was a collaboration between McKinsey and a group called the Blacklight Collective. And this was a group of about 100 storytellers, executives, black, from Hollywood, who got together to try to mobilize change in the industry. And the work built on a lot of existing research. So UCLA, USC had done work, generally speaking, in this domain. So we built on that. We also collected over 20 years of data from film, TV, and more recently streaming. And we interviewed 100 plus creators in the space to get their lived experience. And the final crucial thing which made it a McKinsey research was we put an economic value on the lack of representation in film and TV, right? So value at stake. So let's go to the next page. I'm just going to walk through the major findings of the work, and I'm going to share a couple slides behind each of these just to bring it to life. So finding number 1, which might seem trivial but important. So what we found with the data on representation in the key decision-making roles was that film and TV were among the worst performers on DEI across major American sectors, which when people think of Hollywood, they think of a bastion of progressiveness, if you will. That came as quite a surprise to many people. Less diverse than oil and gas, less diverse than finance, surprising. The second was, we found if you're talking about entry points, your first job, internship, your progression through the ranks, getting your project greenlit, optioned but not funded, getting appropriate funding, every step of the process, getting your project distributed, getting appropriate recognition on the award circuit, we found that black talent was stifled at every step of the process. And it's a process that's very tightly interwoven. Unlike many other sectors where most of your work involves four walls, in Hollywood, it's outside your walls. The agent, the manager, the production company, distribution, network studios. So this ecosystem is crucial. And in this ecosystem, we found that there were friction points across the entire journey. Actually, we mapped, I believe it was 45 different pain points in the journey for a black creative to get their projects produced, distributed, and get recognized throughout the industry. Number 3, which I think Robin mentioned to me, and it may not be surprising to you, but we found that dismal as it was, the level of representation would have been worse had it not been for the few black folks who made it through, because they were the ones creating more opportunities for other black folks. Number 4, the big hook, if you will. When we did the math on the cost, not the black folks, the cost to the industry from these frictions in the system, it summed up to $10 billion per year in lost value. In other words, if these barriers, which were manufactured over decades, centuries, came down, the industry would be $10 billion bigger. Somewhat depressing, but number 5, we've done work across sectors at McKinsey. So, K-12, healthcare, you name it, consumer goods. And we found that if we kept the current pace of progress and other communities stayed still, it would take 95 years to get parity. 95 years. So it would take longer than any of us here would live. Okay? So let's see how we can accelerate that, right? So let me just walk through a couple of the charts to bring this to life. Next page, please. So this chart supports point 1, which is the fact that film entertainment is among the least diverse across all major American sectors. So the chart on the left shows the proportion of C-suite executives who are white, and the chart on the right, proportion who are male. So just so you get oriented, in healthcare, 82% of the folks who sit in the executive suites are white. On the right-hand side, 78% are male. Obviously, that's a lot more than fair share in the population makeup. And if you look at the very bottom, which is where we find film, 92% of the senior executives in film are white, and 80% are male. This was an eye-opener for many of the execs we showed when we had our roadshow in the industry. Next page, please. All right, so this is taking you back to math class. Who loved math here? Anyone? A lot of math folks here. All right, so we looked at every dot on this chart is a film. And the vertical axis is how much money the film made at the box office. And the horizontal axis is the funding it received for promotion and advertising. And the lines show the slope. So the black line is the slope for black-led projects. And the takeaway, not to challenge anyone in math here, is that the slope is steeper for black-led projects. And what it showed is that when you normalize or control for funding levels, black-led films outperformed by 10% on box office receipts delivered. And this is across 5,000 films. This is not a sample of 50. So when given a chance, black projects outperform. That is what the data said. Next, please. So this chart led to a lot of interesting conversation and hopefully some introspection by folks who work in this space. A bit complicated, but let me just start with the one on the left. So we're looking at the likelihood of a film having a black director depending on who is the producer. So the very first chart, just to orient you, says if you have one or more black producers on a film, you have a 42% chance of having a black director. If there's no black producer, that 42% drops to 3%. So unless you have a black producer, you will not have a black director. Let's go to the one in the middle. The one in the middle says, same idea, but for black writers, which is, from the research, a pretty endangered species in Hollywood. So the first bar in the middle says if you have a black producer or more, you have a 73% chance of having a black writer. This across nearly 5,000 films now. If you don't have a black producer, you have a less than 1% chance of a black writer. And you should think about folks you know who've made projects and see if this kind of generally foots with what you've seen. Same idea on the right. If you don't have a black director, you won't have a black writer. So it's almost impossible for a black writer to get a job in Hollywood from this data unless they find a black producer or a black director. Next, please. All right, so what to do about this situation? When we ended the work, we laid out 4 actions we thought could help move the industry forward from where they were. And we're going to talk to Aaron about where things are today. But where we left things off 3 years ago was, number 1, representation does matter across the board. So there was a call to action for the industry, whether it be studios, networks, talent agencies, what have you, awards and festivals and the like, should have representation, which means recruiting in proportion to the population, which means promoting in proportion to the population, and which means, by the way, offering paid internships. Because one of the things that we discovered is the phenomenon of unpaid internships, which sounds like a great idea until you discover that a whole bunch of people can't afford unpaid internships. And as a matter of fact, we spoke to, in the research, a white producer who was very honest. He said, look, the only reason I got this job in the industry was because I went to Harvard, and the email offering the job went to the arts clubs at Harvard, Princeton, and Stanford. That's reason 1. And then he said, furthermore, the only reason I took the job is because my father's a billionaire, and I could work for free. So 2 hurdles that would have wiped out the vast majority of black folks off the bat. So let's get that sorted out. Number 2, transparency. It was very difficult to get good data on the industry. The industry generally does not provide data to public research sources. And we do believe that's going to be important to drive progress, because unless you can measure it and track it, it's very hard to drive progress. Number 3, one of our collaborators loved to say this phrase, don't tell me your priorities, show me your budget. And the reality is that black projects are underfunded substantially. And until we get to where there is some fair share of funding with respect to production, marketing, or what gets captured in the slate, you will not have the stories that we think should be told. And then finally, is we felt it was very important to create a well-funded, independent institution to steward this work. Because absent that, the work has been done by black creatives who should otherwise be working on their craft. So all the advocacy at the time was being done by other black professionals and storytellers, which creates a very, very unfair advantage, literally a tax. So while your white counterparts are working on the next Game of Thrones, you're advocating for basic rights. So until we have an institute, if you will, that can drive this work forward, it's going to be very difficult to make progress. So that's where we left. And the benefits to addressing these challenges would be $10 billion of incremental value for the industry. Now, where are we today? I'm just going to give a quick snapshot. And it's not going to be surprising to this group that we are, if you go to the next slide, please. We're in a moment where there's almost a counter movement against diversity. And a lot of you can read it for yourselves, in the industry, a lot of top DEI jobs have actually gone away over the past couple years. So there's a bit of a counter movement. And I would say a lot of folks who were part of the civil rights movement predicted that. Whenever there's a huge surge forward, there will be forces trying to push that back. And we're seeing that today. Now, number 2, we are seeing some more diversity on screen. The data from UCLA most recently said that there's actually a bit more black representation on screen. The reality is that it's not the same behind the camera, where the decisions get made. And number three, and Aaron, I'm going to ask you about this. When you look at the data, it still shows that black-led projects and black and brown projects do outperform, generate much higher revenues at the box office. And in fact, it's almost impossible to have a big box office success without black and brown audiences. And then number four, we've actually seen some reasonable momentum, and I'm going to ask you about this too, Aaron, around funding, because black creators are starting to take control. So if you think about Hartbeat, if you think about Macro, Confluential, Spring Hill, black creators are starting to take control and seeking funding to be able to tell their own stories the way they would like. So that's a bit of what's going on now. I'm going to pivot to engage Aaron on some questions. So before we do that, let me quickly introduce Aaron. So Aaron, we had dinner last night, so I got a chance to meet him. Aaron is a VP of film at Hartbeat, where he develops and produces culturally relevant, and hear this, high-budget films. Before that, Aaron was VP of Development and Production at Lionsgate and was recognized by Variety magazine as one of Hollywood's new leaders while in the role. At Lionsgate, Edmonds played Aaron, less formally, played a key role in championing the 1619 Project, a portfolio of film, TV, and multimedia programming produced by Lionsgate, the New York Times, and Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Films. He's also been involved in lots of other high-profile projects with stars such as Cate Blanchett, Kevin Hart, Jamie Lee Curtis, Jack Black. He currently serves as an advisor for Film Independent Project Involved program, which is a hands-on filmmaking experience for the next generation of filmmakers and executives. He holds a master's degree from UCLA and a bachelor's degree from Columbia University. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron. So Aaron, that's quite an accomplishment set there. And you're a smart guy. You went to Columbia, UCLA. Tell us a bit about how you got into the industry. I imagine it was pretty straightforward. Just went there, got a big job. Next day, you're a VP, I assume.
I wish it was that straightforward. I did not have the benefit of the producer that you were talking about earlier, even though I went to have the same educational background. I actually, when I graduated during the recession. So I did a lot of couch surfing after I graduated, looking for a job, and had to wait for someone to call me to give me a position. I started out actually in politics and worked for a city council candidate and also did some community organizing while I lived in Harlem. I eventually got a job at HBO while I was in New York, and then when I moved to Los Angeles, I kind of had to start all over. So I was an Uber driver, and I would intentionally pick people up from studios and post-production houses and just kind of ask them questions. That was kind of like my form of informational interviews. I did that for a couple of months and got hired to be a post coordinator for television. And then I decided to go back to school at UCLA, and that's what kind of put me on the development track. But definitely a more roundabout path that took a little bit of time and will to kind of make it happen.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So, Aaron, talk a bit about, from your seat within the industry, what's the state of DEI today in Hollywood?
Yeah, so, right now in the data, you kind of talked about this before, there's been a pullback, a divestment from DEI programs, not just in entertainment, but I think like we all feel that industry-wide in various industries right now. There's been a lot of executives of color who have been laid off in the last year and a half, not only in development and production, but also people who were in charge of these DEI divisions at a lot of these companies are no longer at these companies. So we're in a tough moment that's very, very different from 3 years ago when a lot of companies were investing in people and in programs.
Sad to hear, but not surprising given, as you mentioned, it's generally pretty widespread now.
Yeah.
So in that context, can you talk a bit about the role companies such as Hartbeat would play to help butt the trend or provide opportunities for not just black creatives, but especially black creatives?
Yeah, so Hartbeat was founded by Kevin Hart. It is a multi-platform entertainment company, so we have several divisions that create different pieces of content, from podcasts to movies, television to unscripted television, documentaries, and companies like Hartbeat that are black-owned and where diversity is in the design of the company. It's just a part of the business. It's not performative, but we understand the power of black audiences and audience of color. The fact that black people are culture creators. And so when you are trying to create content and speak to certain audiences, you have to speak to that audience in order to perform well and make money. We were talking last night, and if you look at specifically on the film side, the last maybe 2 years, with the exception of Top Gun Maverick, any movie that grossed more than $100 million, 60% of that audience was people of color. So if you are not speaking to that audience, you are not making money. And so companies like Hartbeat, Spring Hill, Macro, where diversity is part of the design of the company, we do that innately and inherently because it's good business.
So given that it's good business, are you seeing any trends around more funding from, for example, private equity to support black creatives or diverse creatives?
I am, particularly at this moment. So what's happening in the industry, we've had a couple of big things that have really disrupted the business. We had streaming, which caused an explosion in television. Then we had COVID, which created a lot of disruption in the theatrical space. Then we also are just coming out of 2 strikes. And so because of that, a lot of these legacy companies are operating out of a place of fear. They're very risk averse. And that's led to a lot of the layoffs as it pertains to people of color. But what that also means is there's a ton of talent of people who have just tons of experience, extremely intelligent, who are now starting their own companies, from consulting, production companies, and starting to build infrastructures outside of the traditional infrastructure of studios and television. And because of that, previously you had streaming companies who were, when they were making content, they were trying to own the entire world. So they would not do co-productions. They were not looking at outside investment because they wanted to own everything. Now that they're more risk averse, they are looking for opportunities where they can do more co-productions. So they are looking at companies who have access to capital, where they can only put up half of the production costs. They're also looking to acquire more things that are finished films. And so companies like Hartbeat, Spring Hill, Macro, who understand culture and have the financial means to pay for their own productions, those companies are definitely finding more success right now. And I do think there's just going to be an explosion of more opportunities and more of those companies that are opening up, because there are a lot of investment in those companies right now.
Wonderful. Great to hear. Great to hear. So before I turn it over to questions from the audience, let me just ask you this, Aaron. So when we publish a report, we would say we had very polite and generally receptive audiences around the conversation. How are people talking about DEI today in the industry?
It's definitely different. It has become, unfortunately, almost a curse word when you say DEI. And so I think we are in a moment where we have to be strategic. We cannot necessarily telegraph what we are trying to do, and we have to talk about it in a different way. I think what we do at Hartbeat and what a lot of my colleagues at other companies are doing that are like-minded is really focusing on audience. And so attacking diversity by talking about audience. When you talk about who is driving the profits. It is Black people, people of color. And so, when I go out to sell a project, I'm inherently focused on like who is the audience that I'm reaching and making sure that these studios understand who that audience is and the buying power that that audience has. And so instead of talking about like, oh, well, this is, good to tell these stories because they have a huge cultural impact and, it has an impact on just like our society at large and how we see each other and the human impact, I talk about the buying power of the audience. I talk about who that audience is and make sure that they understand who that audience is and what the value that they bring and how much that helps the bottom line.
Great. While the moral argument will ebb and flow, the economic argument has proven to persist. So
exactly, and I think data that you guys, were able to put together in 2021, as well as what USC and UCLA has done, it really helps people like myself to just kind of have that information to be able to, when we are in those rooms, fall back on that.
Wonderful. All righty, thank you, Aaron. So why don't we turn over to the audience for questions?
Hi. So I'm a journalist that covers entertainment, and we've seen these figures for years. UCLA has done study after study to show that diverse movies make more money, and that Black people and Latinos disproportionately go to the movie theater. They disproportionately watch TV. And I wonder, I don't expect you to have a magic answer, but how do we get past... it seems like either the industry is sort of begrudgingly accepting this or they're actively resisting it the way you talk. How do we get to the point where they just acknowledge reality? Because this is something we've known for at least 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted solution. I definitely think, and the data supports this, when you have Black executives and executives of color in the room who have green light power, you end up with more diverse content. Alana Mayo is one of the few people. She oversees production at Orion. She's one of the few Black executives who has that power. Nicole Brown at TriStar is the other person who has that power. And when you look at those slates, they're responsible for The Woman King. They're responsible for Till, movies that really had a huge cultural impact and significance. And I think we need to get to a point where there are more people like them in positions of power. But in addition to that, I think, again, we're in a moment where people aren't going to wait for that to happen. And they're starting to build systems outside of the traditional systems. And so I think it's going to take investment in those companies so that we are pushing at it on two different sides, from outside and within.
Sorry. Hello. With what you were saying in regards to having more executives in the advertising media space that are representative of Black Americans, how much do you believe is rooted in the education prior to even the paid internships? I mean, being in the marketing, brand space, consulting, you don't see a lot of Black people there either, or you try and hire and they don't have the skill set.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't talk about it because it's kind of uncomfortable, but a lot of times I have to turn around young Black kids because they just have no clue on how to build relationships, how to communicate, like what their needs, like they don't even think networking is of value. So a lot of what moves you through entertainment, consulting, media is relationships, whether we want to talk, So how much of it is really the power that be it or the educational system that exposes people at a younger age for more of a holistic view of what's to come if they want to be in this space? And how much of that is, how many kids are exposed to it to know that these are job opportunities?
Yeah, I do think we have to do a better job at highlighting that even these jobs exist. A lot of times, my parents didn't even really understand what I did for a living. And most of the time, like I have to really like walk through to explain it to a lot of my friends who are also outside of the industry. And so I do think, we have to do a better job of explaining like, hey, if you want to work in entertainment, you don't just have to be an actor or a director. You can be an attorney. You can be a development executive. You can work on the marketing side. You can work the distribution side. I think the biggest gap that we have is on the international sales side, because you have the myth that black talent doesn't travel. But when you have black executives in those spaces forcing executives to understand the real value of that talent, I think that makes a difference. So I think we do need to do a better job of explaining just all the different facets of the business and where you can kind of plug and play. And I do agree with you that as we are, I think one of the other issues that we have though, and we were talking about this last night, is typically in entertainment, we are recruiting on the coast and we're missing a lot of folks who aren't on the coast. And so I do think that there's also an effort, not only in the education of just like the reality that these jobs exist, but I think we have to also make sure that we're doing our job as far as like spreading a wider net of looking for talent and not just relying on like, oh, okay, this person, went to Columbia or went to UCLA or USC, but looking at people from other places as well, because there's talent there, but we aren't doing a good job at finding it.
I would say, to echo your point, try a bit harder. So you can always give the pipeline excuse and say you got to start K to 12, but there's a lot more that can be done within your control. So I had a conversation with, I won't name the company, but the company said they were looking for a black, I think production designer, but couldn't find one. So the question was, where did you look? Down the hallway? Where did you look? And throughout the process for the research, we had a school in New Orleans that had 100 film students that couldn't find pathways to Hollywood. They were there. So I do think there's an argument all day long around the infrastructure, the environment, the pipeline, but it's the easy way out. There's a lot more that can be done within our control.
Agree. I'm very active with the National Black MBA Association, and I know that at our national conference coming up in DC in September, that we're going to be doing a lot of sessions on entertainment because our young people have such interest. It was when I heard Ava DuVernay talk about what it took for her to get Origin made that it became real clear to me how tight everything was, because here's someone has this national profile, all of that, supposedly access, and yet she had to put her own money in. That was very revealing. I'm wondering, the group that helped you to initiate this study, are they still around? What are they doing? And to you, even though you're a youngster, you're still an experienced person. Are you doing mentoring yourself?
So as for the group, the group was called the Blacklight Collective. And I'm still in touch with several of the members. But as a unit, and to my last point in recommendation, they don't function the way they used to, partly because they shouldn't. They're entertainment lawyers, they're actors, award-winning actors. They should be doing that work. So the reality is that it shouldn't be on them. They will do it organically because they care about the topic, but it should not fall on them to sustain the energy needed to carry this work forward. So they're still involved in the work, but not in a way that we should expect them to, because they are creators trying to write that next great project.
Yes, mentorship is extremely important to me because I recognize, the many people that poured into me as I was coming up. And so I do a lot of work with Film Independent in trying to bring up the next class of executives of color. At UCLA, I teach at UCLA as well at the graduate program. And again, really focusing on trying to educate and support the next wave of executives of color. And then anyone that I come across, like I get hit up on LinkedIn, and somehow people find my personal email address and cell phone as well. I don't know how they do it, but when that does happen, typically I make sure that I continue to give back, because it is important. Because we need to have people that are coming up constantly behind us to continue to push the effort forward.
Thank you. My name is Dre. I'm at APX. We're a social impact strategy studio. We also play in original content and original series. We'd love to connect with you about that. But the bridge that you gentlemen have put a track light on that comes up from people like Jaleel White, or whenever they reference Wesley Snipes, is the international box office power that black people are not credited for delivering. We get it with Denzel, but they don't give it up to Wesley. And I guess my question for you, brother, was, Aaron, is what did you make of the Blade cameo in the Deadpool Wolverine film? Because some people are telling me it doesn't hit the same until you see how, like, of all people, Ryan Reynolds, a Canadian white guy, thought it appropriate, kind of like Jim Carrey, with Living Single. Like, he thought it appropriate to resurface this piece of the history that if it wasn't for Wesley Snipes, the MCU wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar machine. So my question for you is, when you think about like the international box office power and how they always try to snub and say people like Wesley can't really do it, what do you make of nods from other culture leaders like Kevin, like a Ryan Reynolds, Kevin Hart in that space? What do you make of those people pushing buttons to get that part of it in the story for the next generation? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's important. Like, I think, Sheldon was saying, we all have to figure out within our own sphere, like, what are we capable of doing, and push within that. And so when you are talking about people like Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart, the power that they have within their sphere to shine a light on something is important. And I think we all have that capacity within our own sphere, and it's about making sure that you are doing your part, because it all adds up. And the collective of all of it adding up creates momentum, and creates people changing their perception and the way that they look at it. So I think it's extremely important. I can say for myself, since being at Hartbeat, I'm like hyper focused, like having the experience of being at a buyer like Lionsgate and seeing how the sausage is made and how they look at things. I'm hyper focused at Hartbeat about, okay, when we step into a room, what's the data and the things that we're gonna highlight when we're putting a project forward around just audience and around the scale and scope of audience, because we have that information, the type of company that we are, we can put that stuff together so that when we step into that room, we're not relying on them to figure it out, but we're telling them, this is what it is, here's the answer, and taking ownership of that. Because I think too often we allow them to figure it out and they don't get it right, to be honest. And so I think, again, take advantage of the power and presence that you have and continue to push.
Can I go? Oh, sorry. My name's Wendy Creedle. I am an entertainment lawyer and a filmmaker. And for the past couple of years, I've been working on a documentary about a well-known music media mogul who has transitioned. I have all the music rights and clearances with the record label, with the publishers. Been developing this, and now my question to you is in terms of independent financing to get to the next step, because I do want to retain an ownership stake in the project. What is your advice in terms of how I go forward?
So I think someone was mentioning Origin earlier, and I think they're an amazing case study as well with independent financing from the standpoint of they had nonprofit money, and that was a very new business model in the entertainment space. And so I think being able to look at grants like places like the Ford Foundation, I know they were instrumental with Origin getting the financing that they needed, and other organizations that care about that cause and would be willing to chip in money. I think that's one path. Another path, which is a little bit more challenging, but it's really looking at your own network as far as like people who are excited about this and, trying to see if you can solicit some investment that way as well. There are, I think that, and then there's also, going to companies that would care about that as well, like Hartbeat, Spring Hill, and what have you. So I think there's definitely avenues, and I'm very optimistic, but I do think that we are going to enter into a space where there's going to continue to be a lot of money kind of pouring in outside of the system into content that is about people of color, because I just feel it's a growth opportunity that we're entering into. So,
And I would just add, bring the data into your fundraising conversations.
100%.
Yes, bring the data. I saw Tommy Oliver from Confluential on CBS, I believe, and he was talking about fundraising and referring to this $10 billion. I'm not saying it's the definitive source, but as often as you can remind folks that it's not a charitable endeavor, this is about return on your investment, and it's been proven.
It's a business at the end of the day, so you treat it, and Tommy is great at this. It's like you create a business plan and you treat it like it is a business and not just a passion project.
Hey, over here. My name is Marcus Kyle. I'm here with my film Caged Bird screening. My question, from an inside perspective, what kind of stories is Hollywood, what kind of black stories is Hollywood hungry for? And what kind of stories should we be trying to tell in order to increase representation? Now that we've seen, on one side, a concentration of the stories that are being told, and maybe on the other side, streaming has allowed for a greater diversity of stories to be told.
Yeah. So for me, the types of stories that I'm always on the hunt for is I'm looking for high concept stories that can reach a large audience and that are driving culture that centers around characters of color, where the main source of conflict in that story isn't about like their identity. It's not like there's racism or sexism that they have to overcome in order to succeed. And I think when you focus on stories like that and where the conflict is coming from like a universal thing like grief or, zero to hero, something like that, then it allows you to see black people in stories like where, okay, this is a, space odyssey film that centers a character of color, and it's not about them being black. You can still talk about that in some ways, but it's not going to be as overt. I think that's where things are trending and changing. In my opinion, I think Ryan Coogler is like amazing at being able to do that. I think when you look at Creed as well, and just those three movies, another great example of how you're able to tell stories that are character specific, but very broad, where everyone can kind of relate to it and enjoy it and see themselves in those characters. And I think that's what we, should be trying to do more as filmmakers of color that are trying to get these stories out there. Because then it allows you to talk about not just the universal nature of the story, but it allows you to talk about just like the audience selling that to buyers where they might not understand the intricacies of the specifics culturally.
I guess I would just add, purely as an audience member, and I saw your film, great work, by the way. As an audience member, I would say, tell the stories that your imagination leads you to tell. So J.R. Tolkien never lived in Middle-earth. He wrote Lord of the Rings. George R.R. Martin never lived in Westeros. He wrote Game of Thrones. So there's a market, I believe, as an audience member for your imagination. So that's what I would say.
And looking at the information that you provided regarding the lack of diversity, one of the things that I have found as a woman who is an actress is that in spite of the fact that we may be low in representing ourselves as people of color, it's even lower for black women. There are typically films that are done by black productions where it's a male-dominated cast and it's one woman. So that creates this competitive energy. What is Hartbeat Productions doing to come out of that same model that we have been following since cinema was developed?
Yeah. So I would say two things. One, we're in a space right now where the goal of the company is to scale and create a company that is not just centered on Kevin Hart. He's very much passionate about that and about, raising up the next generation of talent and supporting them in that endeavor. So one of the programs that we have at Hartbeat is called Women Right Now. And it is a program that is specialized for Black women who are the next wave of comedic voices and writers, and giving them mentorship and investment so that they can create short films. We have a partnership with Sundance where those short films are then shown at Sundance, and then those films are broadcast on Peacock. And so it's a program that is about not only access but actually creating an actual piece of content that people will see, so that you have like a signature of like, hey, this is what I am capable of. And so we're working on a feature film that was based on one of the short films. We've done this program for 2 years, so we're in our second season of it. We're developing a film that was based on one of the short films. And there's been filmmakers like Logan London who've come out of the program. So it's definitely something that we are focused on, because you're right, like the intersectionality is very important when it comes to diversity, and we have to do our part to make sure that we are continuing to push that agenda forward as well.
Is this on? Oh, hi.
Sorry.
Hi. My name is Anthony Green, and I work with Risk Strategies. It's our subsidiary. DeWitt Stern provides entertainment, film, fine art, risk management, and insurance services. Going back to the business issue you talked about, it seems like there is one group of behind-the-scenes people in fine art, in music, and I'm talking about the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, right? Collaborations amongst those people who are Black, whether it's in film, whether it's in fine art, is really an avenue to changing this. Because and there are two organizations I'd suggest you look at and hear your thoughts. One of them is called the Minority Corporate Counsel Association. It's in DC, and it's an organization with general counsels. A number of them are of companies in the entertainment industry who've made a public commitment to diversity. And the other is the Sports Lawyers Association. For the first time in their history, they have a Black president, brother from Toronto who worked on the Emmys. I think those are points that haven't been leveraged adequately to get more capital and support for films.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Vanessa Paul. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I'm in the entertainment industry as well. And I just want to confirm what the young man is saying here. Get involved with my husband had a chance to be involved with the program you have with Sundance. And it was a program where they provided Black women an opportunity to direct short films. My husband did one called Buddy and Bernice. And so it's airing right now on Peacock. And it was a wonderful opportunity. So anybody here, please check into how to become a part of that, because it's awesome. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Jamaica, and I know that you guys spoke about like what companies should be doing to create more opportunities for like young Black talent to get those, positions. But what are some of the things that those young people should be doing to like kind of push through some of those boundaries that we're facing? Because there's like a lot of people who have like the educational background, the experience, and sometimes even the network, but are still oftentimes not even considered for positions at like those higher places. So what are some things we should be doing?
So, I mean, this isn't going to be. I want to make sure I'm giving like a very tangible answer. I mean, I think the first thing that does come to my mind, it is continuing to be persistent and tenacious. When I think about my own journey, it's like I feel like there were a lot of people that poured into me, but also if I didn't believe in myself, there were many opportunities where I could have just, quit. And decided to do something else. So I definitely believe in the power of belief and believing in yourself, because so many people are going to tell you no. So there's that aspect. I do think as far as tangible things that they can be doing, I think it depends on what avenue that they're jumping into. I think if you are looking to write or direct or even be a development executive, watching things and taking the time to sit back and just analyze it to yourself, and really tracking like, okay, I watched this movie, I love it. What is the moment in this movie that, my heart started to flutter, or I started leaning in and like paying attention to that, because there really is a science to storytelling. We've been storytellers like since humanity existed. And there's a structure to it, and being able to watch things and break it down and pay attention to that, and understand the moments that you lean in, I think is very important. Because the better that you understand that, the better you're able to articulate, why you like something, what it is about that story. So when you do get that interview or you are talking to somebody, you're actually able to talk about like why you like something. And it's not just like, oh, I just love this movie. But it's like you're talking about a specific moment and why that moment mattered. And I think that's really important, and that helps you stand out when you are in those conversations. So, rewatch your favorite movies, try and find the scripts for those favorite movies and read those scripts and really break them down and analyze like what are the moments that you notice that you are leaning in, that make you sad, that cause an emotional reaction, and be able to speak to that.
Sorry. So first of all, this has been really helpful. So thank you so much. And I might have missed this data, so forgive me if I'm causing you guys to repeat yourselves. But I was wondering, what have you guys noticed about the trend in compensation for Black actors and actors of color in terms of making sure that they are compensated for their films? And what are you noticing in terms of an increase or a sort of a flat line or a decrease, and what do you predict, and anything you have to offer there? Thank you so much.
We didn't specifically look at salaries and compensation, so I don't have a data point to share, so I'd rather not speculate. I don't know if you have a sense, Aaron.
I don't have a data point. I can say maybe anecdotally, there's definitely still a disparity there. I think that I think it is. I think in some ways, like you can approach it in different ways. It's like, okay, do you increase the salaries of people of color to match their white counterparts, or do you decrease the salaries of white counterparts to match people of color? I've heard both arguments. I don't really have a say either way, but there's definitely still a disparity. As far as solutions, I think it's something that we still have to figure out and work towards, because it still exists.
Number 4. Hi, my name is Sing Lathan. I'm a filmmaker. My question to you is, as greenlight executives or positions of greenlighting, how do you best like to receive pitches or ideas for projects that you would sign off on? Through agents, through direct through the actors, through filmmakers, through lawyers?
It varies, and I'd say, if you have a personal connection with someone, you can send it to them directly. If you don't have that connection, try and go through your lawyer or your agent. I think right now, the way the business is reacting and just being more risk averse, pitches aren't being bought as much, and so there's definitely a desire to have more specs. I think coming out of the writer's strike specifically, now on the film side, you're guaranteed 2 writing steps. And so, I don't know I think before there was definitely a feeling that writers had where it was like, okay, well, I don't want to write a spec and do free work and then go and sell it and only have like 1 step to maybe potentially fix it. I think now that there's guaranteed 2 steps, I'm hoping that changes the thinking around that, because I do think that the specs are just going to start moving more. Yeah.
Would you like it in deck form, sizzle reel, or just fully fleshed out, and then you just?
I think it depends. Again, I think like there are times where I just get a short 10-minute pitch and then the script, and that's enough. There's other times, particularly like in the television space, where there's more of a full sizzle of what that project looks like. I think it depends on what the project is, how simple it is to convey the idea of it. So there really isn't a one size fits all.
Wait, one more question here.
With all the facts and numbers that you blessed us with today, how could someone dispute that if you're trying to sell your project? What excuses do they have?
I will say, we found it surprising too. And there are a couple of things about the industry that I think set it apart from other industries. One is the ecosystem aspect. So even from the questions, your filmmakers here, you need to traverse multiple different entities, fundraising, distribution company. So it's not a one silver bullet. You need to solve the problem across multiple different entities to get there. And the second thing is, and Aaron should speak to this, is I got the sense in the research that data is used differently, shall I say, in Hollywood. Where, and maybe because it's art, it's intuition and gut and my experience versus here are some facts. But I don't want to overstep. But my sense is that, number one, it's a multi-entity problem to be successful. It's not just go to one shop, and if they're fine, you're fine. It's multiple different shops. And the second is how data is used to inform decisions.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely, there are several moments of gatekeeping in the process where it allows for the no to happen. And that is the challenge. And so I do think, and I do feel like this is happening more now where, there are enough like-minded people of color in different positions where now I'm on the sell side. And so I know on my hand all these senior black executives that are buyers. And so I can reach out to them before I do anything and be like, hey, I'm trying to go out with something. This is kind of what it's looking like right now. Can you give me some, what is it? What are the battles that you're going to have to fight? And how can I help give you the answers so that when you go talk to your boss, where you have as much information as you need. And then they can tell me what that is, and then I can try and put those pieces together. So it's kind of like you have to have those connections to reverse engineer so that everyone kind of can do their part, which is extremely challenging.
But that's kind of the way that people are approaching it right now.
Coming? There it is. Me again. Wanting to clarify something with the data. That $10 billion opportunity, is that specific to black representation or is that total people of color? And really what I'm trying to drive towards, is there an opportunity for multiplicity when you have two or more racial, ethnic groups together, i.e. a Hispanic producer and a black director? Does the data say that taps into an even greater audience?
Right. So the way we cut the data is we qualified projects based on a minimum bar for black representation. So for example, to say it was a black-led film, from a creative standpoint, we have to have 2 members of the behind the camera folks being black. Because you may know this because you work in the space. On average, there are about 6 between the writers, producers, directors, 6 folks behind the camera. So we said if there were at least 2, that's a check mark, that's a black-led project. Now it could be, to your point, that there's also a Hispanic person. We didn't strip that out. So it could be that there is some interlinked aspects of the data, but by and large, and we've also done separate work, by the way, for Latinos in Hollywood, and I don't want to misquote the number, but I believe in that case, that report found there was $18 billion in addition. So there was a bit of an attempt to clean the data to make sure there was a minimum threshold for black representation, and then separate work did confirm similar large numbers in terms of opportunity from Latino representation. Any more questions? So with that, maybe we close here. Aaron and I will stick around if you have questions, but I would just reiterate the business case is there, it's valid, and despite some of the sobering facts, I would say we should feel energized because there's a lot that we can do within our control. And I always feel a sense of being uplifted when I'm around black folks. So I would say leave with that energy, just from the essence of what this festival is all about. So with that, thank you, and have a good rest of the day.
Can I just add one thing? Also, just like with that energy, like let's create action with that energy. Like there's a lot of different people from different backgrounds in this room. So let's take that energy and turn it into action and, create momentum as far as like the content that we make and, the business relationships that we create after here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.